Well, I think we're ready to get started for the deep dive this morning. I just want to say welcome to everybody that's joining. It's Monday, November 18th, and we are starting this week off with the deep dive. So good to see so many people already joining. With the countdown, I think we've got close to 40 or 50 people that have joined now, and so we'll get started here in just a minute. But let us know where you're watching from. It's always so good to see people from all over the country that join the deep dive on Monday mornings. To start their week talking about what some of the hottest topics are in real estate. Scott, see you there, and Destin, always good to have you there, and Jackie, see you as well from Bakersfield, both ends of the country. It seems like this morning starting off. So good to see everybody. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get hopped in and get this thing started if I can figure this out. All right, here we go. So deep dive this morning. We're going to talk about the biggest questions you should be able to answer. This is going to be the first part. Next week, I'm going to do the second part to this and get this going. But I'll talk about why we're going to do that here in just a minute. Becky, Jean, see you there. Mel and Carol and Barbara, Mike. So many folks joining this morning. Glad to have you on. Always good to see everybody on the deep dive. This topic is an important topic. We're going to do it this week, and I mentioned we're going to do it next week as well, kind of part one and part two. And why is that? It's for this reason right here. Over the next few weeks, we're probably going to see more people than we've seen all year long with different holiday gatherings, maybe a church gathering, maybe Thanksgiving, whatever the case is. The next, I don't know how many weeks it is. I probably should have looked at the calendar, but next 6 or so weeks between here and the end of the year, a lot of things happening where you'll come in contact with people. And for sure, I will guarantee this, the topic of real estate will come up. And so we want to be prepared for what those questions are. We want to give you, as a KCM member, all the visuals maybe to have on your phone so that you can say, hey, here's something I want to show you on this topic. So that I can, if I'm in that situation, I can be the educator for somebody that maybe has a question or has, a thought about what's going on in the market right there. See so many people joining. Thank you for putting in there. If you haven't done that yet, let us know where you're watching from. See everybody joining there. Gail, see you in Alpharetta. I grew up not too far from Alpharetta. Good to see you on this morning. So many folks that are joining. Great to have you on. And we do these deep dives every Monday morning, and we're going to talk about these questions because of this core belief. Most agents out in the market today know what's happening. Good agents understand it, but our job in these conversations are to be great agents, and we believe that only great agents can actually explain what's happening. So the question is, when I'm sort of faced with a scenario of somebody says, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Can I explain what's happening in the market? That's why we do the deep dive. That's why this is so critically important. Anytime you're asked a question, it would be good to know how you're going to respond to that if you can sort of anticipate what somebody would ask. And, sitting down at something, maybe a holiday gathering, and people saying, well, what's going on in the market? Or I wouldn't buy a home right now, or whatever may come out of their mouths. We want to be prepared to answer those. And, I'm so grateful for our KCM team that works hard to come up with these questions. And the first three that we're going to sort of address this morning are these right here. One around mortgage rates, and I'll kind of go back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, show you that, but give you the most up-to-date, not only projections, but what experts are saying. Then we'll move into, what about prices? This is a big question. Folks thinking, are prices going to come down? What will it take for prices to come down? I don't think this market's sustainable. We'll talk about the pricing piece right now and where we see that going into next year. And three, will I be able to find a home if I move? So many people over the last couple of years haven't been able to find a home, and we'll sort of break down where inventory's at. And I'll give you the spoiler alert. In most markets, inventory is growing across the country. And then next week, we'll talk about three additional topics around affordability, around what's up for next year, and we'll handle the question, and I think will absolutely come up in one form or fashion about, is this market going to crash? Right, that's one that we've talked about many times on the deep dive, but it will come up. I literally had somebody send me a message over the weekend, and they had two scenarios. They had one buyer that said, hey, we think prices are going to go down next year because of the incoming president. So they're like, how would you respond to that? That's what they sent me the message on. And they had a seller say, take the home off the market, but because we believe prices are going to go up dramatically next year, and then we want to sell next year when they go up. So literally two ends of the spectrum, and maybe even where you sit today, maybe you're getting questions from people that maybe think this or they think that. The question is, how do I respond to them when they come up with those scenarios? So let's hop into this. So good to see everybody on this morning, just watching everybody in there put where they're from. Good to have everybody on. So let's talk about this first question. When will mortgage rates come down? Now, I told you we're going to back up and cover what we covered just a couple of weeks ago. And there was sort of this quote here from Ralph McLaughlin, where he said the trajectory of rates over the coming months will be largely dependent upon three factors: performance of the labor market, that's unemployment and everything that we see there, outcome of the presidential election, and is inflation coming back. So if you were on the deep dive, if you missed it, just a little refresher there. If you were on that, you remember that, or maybe it jogs your memory for it. And he says, while volatility has been the theme of mortgage rates over the past several months, we expect stability reemerge towards the end of November and early December. Well, I looked at Mortgage News Daily this morning, look at sort of projections. Our KCM research team has gone out and grabbed that. But, we looked at, when we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, we know what's happened in the most recent jobs report. Now, we'll get another look at this at the beginning of December, but maybe very, very little growth, really only in healthcare and government. Two very, government obviously is what it is, but healthcare, very highly regulated industry, maybe anemic growth here at best in the labor market. And inflation, the Fed's pretty much said, we see this downward trend. Now, the question right now is inflation going to reemerge? And we'll talk about that in a minute. And that's sort of what the bond market is trading off of right now and pushing rates higher. As I looked at Mortgage News Daily, I think this morning we're up over 7% on a 30-year fixed. And depending on the lender that you're working with, they're probably in the neighborhood of that somewhere right now. But how do we give advice? Nobody, always joke around and say nobody has a crystal ball, and rates is certainly one of those areas that people have a question and sort of probably think, when are we going to see better rates where I can afford a home, where I can go out and buy? So let's kind of break down what the latest projections are and what experts are saying. I'll start here with Danielle Hale. She said rates have moved in a direction that suggests investors are preparing for either more inflation or stronger economic growth. Okay, so that's sort of the anticipation that we'll see a little bit more economic growth, and that could bring inflation. She goes on to say, either way, it does seem likely, at least in the short term, that mortgage rates are going to go higher. Now, this is a quote from a couple of weeks ago, but I think that the big piece here is to understand the reason rates are higher right now. It's in the anticipation of potentially stronger economic growth or more inflation. Okay, so that's the first point I want you to remember. And listen, if you're a KCM member, you can download all these slides and use these, put them on your phone, getting ready for maybe gatherings or seeing people. And Jill, I agree with you. I think a lot of that has to do with tariffs and what's been proposed, and would there be an inflationary effect on that? But let's keep going on this. Ralph McLaughlin said home buyers hoping for another dip in mortgage rates by the end of the year will likely be disappointed. But the good news is we still expect the long-run trend in rates to be downward as the fight against pandemic-induced inflation comes to an end. And that sort of seems like the feeling that we're heading in the right direction in inflation, but is it going to be, sort of stoked back up? What are forecasters saying right now, given all of this information? This right here is the latest projections as of November 13th, from Fannie, from MBA, from Wells, from NAR, and you still see this downward trend. But I'll sort of draw a line in here to show you where I see the sort of the band of 2025, and it's right here. That's between 5.5 and 6. So the overwhelming majority of forecasters here kind of get in there. All of them are in there And while we may not see something as aggressive below 5.5%, we may not even make it to 5.5% in the next year. It's all going to be based upon incoming data. Does inflation reemerge? Right? What's the stability of the job market? And I think, what's the Fed doing? What's their action going to be over the next few meetings? What's going to happen in December? What's going to happen in 2025? But right now, it's all about, okay, what do we have on the horizon? Here's what forecasters are saying, so you can bring that up. Say, hey, here's what I see. But the question is, I think on a lot of people's minds is, what impact would that have on you buying a home right now? That's really the question. Because the one thing that I think we can say confidently is this right here. Probably not going to be big, huge swings towards the 5% range. The expectations rates are going to be somewhere in the 6% range as we move into 2025. Okay, so that gives you a perspective. Now, I think this is interesting because there's sort of this opportunity right now if you're a buyer, right? And we know that in the business that volume has slowed down a little bit as folks have gone, you know what, it's gotten a little too expensive to buy a home. And so now there's opportunity. More inventory is coming to market. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute when we said, hey, will I be able to find a home? There are most markets out there that have more inventory coming in. And that is a good thing for people that are looking. But that's a kind of a breakdown right now. Mortgage rates, that's going to change each week as we go forward. So stay connected to KCM and have this information on your phone, because I think it's a topic that's going to come up as you sit down with people or people have questions about real estate and about the market. The next one that I think is on top of a lot of people's minds is, what's it going to take for home prices to come down? And, sort of I've said this many times, traditional thinking, what goes up must come down. And, the dramatic rise in home prices across the country over the last several years has led a lot of people to sort of have questions. And next week, I'm going to cover this, topic of, is the real estate market going to crash, from a very interesting perspective. And I'm going to cover it from the perspective of consumer debt in this country, which is at an all-time high. And that's where a lot of these questions start to originate. Like, well, what about consumer debt? What about people and they're incurring more debt? How's that going to affect real estate? So we'll talk about that next week. But what will it take for prices to come down? Well, I think the biggest piece of advice I would have for anybody that's starting to have this question, and I mentioned the question that came to me this week, and I think prices are going to go up, or I think prices are going to go down, is, how do I do two things? First, how do I understand what this person's perspective is? I've always mentioned the best question to ask in that sort of interaction is, tell me what you've heard. What are you basing your assumption on? What are you basing your assumption on? You think prices are going to go up, or you think prices are going to go down? What are you basing that on? I want to hear that first and understand it. Because if I can understand it, then I can either agree, disagree, or educate in that case, and probably educate regardless. If I agree, then I can say, hey, let me sort of show you why what you're thinking is true, what's behind that. Or if I disagree, I can say, here's what's going on out of the market right now. I always come back to this slide when we're talking about price, because I think it underpins the fundamentals in the market. Is this one right here. This is a look at single family housing units completed going all the way back to the 70s. And if you look, there were literally more homes built in this country in the 70s and 80s and 90s than there have been in the last 15 years. The red bars there where we've underbuilt. The green there in the middle are 4 consecutive years during the housing crisis where we built more homes in this country than we ever built before. Didn't do it before, haven't done it since. But the reason there's been upward pressure on prices is because of undersupply. There are more people that want to buy a home in this country than there are available homes for them to buy. And that's what drives prices. And so I think people understanding that will give them perspective on the market. And then we can share what's happening in our local market. We can share the national perspective. But there's no doubt that is what has driven dramatic price increases over the last couple of years. And we in the business know that. we know that, as folks sort of got into bidding wars and the frenzy of the last several years happened, that's what drove prices up. But as we go into next year, Bankrate Greg McBride said this: home price appreciation will be particularly tepid, with many markets seeing little or no change in price. I can tell you the forecasters, and I'll show it to you in a minute. I've mentioned it before on the deep dive. Kate has as well. The 2025 price forecast is very, very normal price appreciation, but certainly there are markets, as inventory rises, as days on market rises, that will see less of the frenzy, and certainly the path of mortgage rates will contribute to that as well. But if we look at forecasters, these are 10 that we watch here at KCM. You see half of these fit somewhere between 3 and 4% in price appreciation. The average of all 10, 2.5%. So what I would say is what we're looking for next year is very normal, very healthy. The word I would use is healthy price appreciation across the country. Now, depending on the market that you're in, that's where local market dynamics come in, and that's where they start to make an impact on, this is what I see happening. Here's what I see happening nationally, but here's what's happening right here where we're at. But I think price will be a point that comes up, and you don't have to use all these slides or even agree with me, but my coaching to you would be: grab images and visuals out of your KCM membership to have on your phone to be able to show people what exactly is coming up in the next year in 2025. Last question on this first part series this week: will I be able to find a home if I move? I mentioned there's just about not a market in this country that is not seeing more homes coming to market, and this is probably kind of a picture's worth 1,000 words in this case. And this is a look at inventory going all the way back to January 2017. You see it sort of bottoming out right here around the beginning of 2022. And since then, we've seen inventory growing, not because fewer people are interested in buying a home. It's because of the affordability factor. I've always referenced that Bright MLS study that said 70% of buyers in the previous year abandoned their search because of price. They just said it's gotten too expensive. We're out. And as we see going into next year, forecasters saying, mortgage rates coming down as we go into the year, that'll bring more people back into the market. So there is this opportunity where inventory is growing. Many people are kind of wondering, okay, what are we going to do? What's going to happen right here? And maybe pausing, maybe saying, okay, how do I sort of position myself? I think there's opportunity in this. One last thing I'll give you: in October, this is very interesting, there were 29% more homes actively for sale on a typical day in October nationally compared with the same time in 2023, compared to last year, marking the 12th consecutive month of annual inventory growth and the highest count since December 2019. So many, many markets are seeing growth above pre-pandemic levels, above December 2019. And that is a good thing. We want to see more inventory come back into the market and give people more options for the home that they want as they go out and they're thinking about doing that. So I hope these help you answer those questions. We'll be back again next week going through those 3 other questions. If you weren't on, I mentioned them. We're going to talk about affordability. We're going to talk about what next year holds for sales. And we'll talk about this crash question from the perspective of consumer debt, it rising in this country. That'll be something you don't want to miss. I'll wrap up with this. I've mentioned this the last couple of weeks. We do a survey now with John Burns Research and Consulting. And if you scan this QR code, you can get to be a part of that. And we'll send you a message when that survey comes back out. But it gives us your feedback. That way we can take the feedback, we can use it as we give you more insights into what's happening in this market. So as always, I'm glad to be on the deep dive. Glad that you joined and started your week off with the deep dive. If you're a KCM member, go into your KCM membership, grab these slides, put them on your phone, be ready for these questions to come up, and we're going to do it again next week. And maybe even if there's somebody that that needs to hear this message, tag them here on Facebook or invite them to show up next Monday, because I guarantee you these questions are going to come up when we see people over the next several weeks in the holidays. So we'll see you back next week, and always grateful to start our week off with the deep dive.